Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about the 8 important things that you need to know about poetry, and these 8 things are actually like language. They're like a language in poetry. So without wasting much of your time, we shall begin. So the first thing that you need to know about poetry is that there is no specific way of writing a poem. So poetry is actually written like anything is written like any other, I don't know, any other story is written like a story. It could be written just the way you want it, as long as you write it in lines. And the second thing is actually that poetry is written in lines, which are called stanzas. When you write a group of lines, they're actually called stanzas. That's in poetry. So the third thing that we need to know is that when you're writing poetry, things may or may not rhyme. So if you're a starter, if you're just starting poetry and you're thinking about, I don't know, starting poetry, you haven't yet started poetry but you want to join poetry, you have to remember that in poetry you don't have to rhyme everything that you say. So that brings us to our fourth thing. The fourth thing is that a group of 14 words that actually consists of rhymes, like not words but 14 sentences, 14 stanzas that actually rhyme, is called a sonnet. So in a sonnet, you can just have like 14 sentences that have like syllables that completely rhyme in all the 14 sentences. That is the rule of a sonnet. So yeah, that was our fourth thing, which brings us to our number 5. Yeah, so the number 5th thing is that when you're writing poetry, you have to choose sentences, then arrange them in a certain way that you feel and think would be really powerful and would get a lot of people to get what you're trying to say, what you're trying to explain, what you're trying to express. And then our number 6 is that when you're doing poetry, you have to think about your creativity. Like, you have to think on that extent of, I don't know, creativity. You just have to think of all sorts of words that would actually be combined to just make somebody understand your feelings, your ideas, and emotions. So our number 7 is that poetry has rhythm. A lot of people actually think that poetry is just like speaking. It's like when you get a book and then you start reading. Like, let me just do this. So I got the Hardy Boys Adventures. This is Deception on the Set. So you can turn any sentences in anything into poetry, because poetry is just like, I don't know, it's just a way of making a few sentences sound pleasant to the ear. So having rhythm depends on the sentences that you're reading and the way that you actually feel them. So I'll just take this short part. I haven't actually read this book, but we just have it on the table, but I haven't read it. So I'll just read a small part. Like, in just reading it, then I'll convert it into like a poem. So it says, excuse me, I shouted over the whine of the motor. The figure turned and the power tool spun down. As the dust settled, we saw that the man was young, and of the special effects technicians, he wore goggles and a particle mask and was covered with chalk dust. The power tool was a large circular. Okay, that is actually reading, and most people think that poetry is actually just reading something. So I was just reading there, but then listen, if I actually put the mind of a poet into reading it. Excuse me, I shouted over the whine of the motor. The figure turned and the power tool spun down. As the dust settled, we saw the young man who was once one of the special effects technicians. He wore goggles and the particle mask and was covered with a dark dusty, cold. Okay, that is actually kind of like an example of how to like have rhythm in your poem. So that is just that. Or if I were to come up with something from my mind, I would say this one poem. It said from the is okay. Yeah, okay. I'll just come up with something that would actually rhyme, but not really rhyming, but it's actually poetry with rhythm. So from the west clouds, hurrying with the winds turning sharply here and there like a plaque of locusts, whirling, tossing up things on its tail like a madman chasing after nothing. That is actually poetry. That is rhythm in poetry, sorry. So you just have to have rhythm in poetry. The way you express yourself in poetry actually has to do with you connecting your emotions. Then the last thing, that is the eighth thing that you need to know about poetry and being a poet, is that when you're writing a poem, you have to have figurative language. So what I mean by figurative language is that we normally say a whole lot of things like, I don't know, if I were to say like, I'm seated on a hot pan, somebody would think that what I'm trying to say is that I'm cooking and then I accidentally trip onto the hot pan and sit on it. Okay, that's funny in so many ways, but that's not what I actually mean. What I actually mean when I say I'm seated on a hot pan, for me, is that I'm in this condition where I feel everything around me is hot and I'm just popping up with a whole lot of ideas. So it's like the heat of the pan are my ideas, and the pan itself, me being in the pan itself, is that I'm in a box or I'm just somewhere and all these ideas just keep coming up to me. So those are the 8 important things that you need to know about poetry. And for these and videos like this, if you want to hear more about poetry, you can just subscribe to my channel, hit the like button. If this video was helpful to you, then when you subscribe, you can hit the notification bell and you'll be updated when I post my next videos. So yeah, that's that. I'm Maclara, and good luck with your poetry class.